Hello, my name is Carl Surrey, and this is a new video tutorial for the Facebook group called Fans of Serif Software. Uh, in this tutorial I want to have a look at the gradient map. Now I have looked at the gradient fill layer, which is the tool that is found over here with the flood fill tool and the gradient fill tool. And I must admit, I thought for ages, up until yesterday, in fact, that the gradient map, which is an adjustment found over here, and the gradient fill tool were just the same thing, but just slightly named differently, because they look and feel and everything seems to be the same. But it wasn't until I saw a video tutorial yesterday, which I get from a magazine which I buy, and I've converted many of their tutorials into written tutorials, which is Digital Photo Magazine, which is a very good magazine, and I would recommend you checking it out, because their articles are very good about photography and what have you, but they also supply you with a disc each month, and on that disc there will be video lessons. Now these lessons are geared towards Adobe products, be they Photoshop, Elements, or in some cases Lightroom, but I have been adapting them, converting them, whatever you want to call it, to use with PhotoPlus. And the one I watched yesterday was about the gradient map, and I was quite pleasantly surprised to actually learn something new, so I thought I would pass that information on to you. But before I go on, I will just do a very quick display of the gradient fill tool, which I covered in the beginner's guide part 6, I believe it was. And I will do this very quickly. I'm not going to sit here and explain exactly what I'm doing as such. I'll just make it a new layer above that. Select the gradient fill tool, and then I'll just draw a line down the page. So you can see that I have the black going down to white, and then you could just change the blending mode. I can't remember what it was now. Say overlay, and it will make the top half darker and the bottom half lighter, and then turning that on and off, you can see the effect it has. But also you could edit the colors and the types of gradient. So I could have changed the gradient from orange to pink, green to orange. So there are all sorts of different ones. So if I selected OK on that, let me hide that one and make a new layer, and then use this coloured gradient, go to overlay. As you can see, it makes a very psychedelic image, but you can still tell that the gradient is, because it goes from the red through blue down to yellow. So that is quickly how the gradient fill tool works. If you want to know more, check out the video or written tutorial that I did for this. So I will just shut these down and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so let's have a look at the gradient map adjustment layer, which can be obtained from these adjustments here, and it's listed here, gradient map, or you can make a new gradient map by selecting it from the menu down here on the bottom, from the half white half black adjustment layer icon. Now before I jump in and make one, I'll just make a little bit of explanation. Now this image of the black slowly fading in different steps to the white. I must admit I didn't make myself. I did borrow it from the internet, and I'm hoping that's okay with the website I borrowed it from. It was one about calibrating your screen, if I remember correctly. But I just want to use this as a demonstration. In the gradient map, you are changing the grade, the difference between the shadows and the highlights, so between blacks and whites, and obviously the various colours in between. So when you change the colours or whatever, you don't just change like with the gradient fill tool, where you could have like red and then it changes to blue and then changes to yellow. If you set this up as going red to blue to yellow, what it would do is it would make the darker pixels across the whole picture red, the mid-tone pixels across the whole picture blue, and the whites or highlights across the whole picture yellow. Now let me just make this gradient map layer. As you can see here, because the gradient is set going from black to white, there is very little change. There was a subtle change, it just made everything a bit more intense. But like with the gradient fill tool, if you click on this, it will open up the same tool, which is why I, and I'm guessing a lot of other people, thought it worked in exactly the same way, but it does not. If I can find the same, can't remember which one it was now, but I'll just click on this one, and you can see that immediately it's changed this image, going all the dark pixels are orange and all the white pixels are now red. So you could just click around like this until you alter it how you want. So that is a very quick demonstration of how this works differently to the gradient fill tool, because this affects all pixels across all layers. So I'll just cancel that, and then I will go to another picture which I took myself, which is underneath Walton Pier. I've picked this picture because there is a lot of black pixels and quite a lot of bright pixels where the sun is coming under the pier. So what I want to do is I will again add the gradient map, and by default it does start with the black and white, which is okay if that's what you want to make. If you wanted to convert it into black and white, that is a quick way of doing it. But I want to change this pixels and everything else using more colors. So if I just click inside this representation of the gradient here, it will open up the same gradient tool, which is a lot of where the confusion I had with both tools looking exactly the same. And what I want to do is to change the colors, which are currently set at black and white. So if I click on the color stop for the black area, you can either double click it to open this up, or click it once and then click on the color panel here. Now this is the bit that I learnt in the video, is that when the gradient map is concerned, all the pixels down this side of the screen on the left deal not with color but with tones, or the pixels, or all the top ones are the black end of the range and the bottom ones are the white end of the range. So if I click and drag down here, staying as close to the left as I can, you can see that the image colours aren't changing, it's just changing from black to white. If I go back to the top, all the pixels will go back to where they were. And similarly, if you come across to the right hand side, this side deals with the colors of the pixels. So if I come down this side of the screen, as you can see, they are getting lighter, but they are also adding color. So depending where you are on this gradient map, you can make the pixels lighter or darker, or you can make them slightly different shades of whatever color you have this set on. So if I came into the middle of the screen, for example, we're getting a more pinky image because it's halfway between the black and white and halfway between the grey and the colour. I hope this makes sense to you. So you can, but as you can see, you're affecting the whole image, not just in certain layers of colour, if you see what I mean. So what I could do here is, at the moment I'm affecting the blacks or the shadows. So I could make the shadows a bit lighter and just add a hint of colour, not too much, to that, and then click OK, and then click on the highlight stop, and then open up the same box again. So this time we should be affecting the highlight. So it started off down here in the whites. So again, if I drag this up, it will make the whole image black, and if I come down the right hand side, it affects the colours. So I hope this does demonstrate to you how this differs from the gradient fill tool, because you are affecting the whole image, not just certain areas like you do with the gradient fill tool. So, and then similarly, you don't have to stick with the reds, for example. I could move to the yellows and try and come around and find a colour combination that works for me. Now, when I tried this before, I can't remember the settings that I did it on, because I did have a practice. So if you are going to do something like this, it could be a good idea to practice it first and find out what works for your taste. I think I'll move this back up to the slightly reddy orange colour. Oh, that will do for now. I will leave it there. But if you do know the colour you are going for, you can obviously put in the value in the red, green and blue area. So you could do 242 in there and 208 and 99 in there. You can also use the HTML code, which starts off with a hash, and in this case was F2D063. So if I just quickly move this somewhere up here like that, as you can see, the colour's totally changed, and as does the HTML code. But if I click and highlight, leaving the hash code there, and make this F2D063, as you can see, once I click OK, it should go back to where I was. Just come back to that. As you can see, it is F2D063 still. And then I could close these down, and as you can see, I've totally changed the image just by using the gradient map to alter the pixels from a sort of brown colour going to a yellow colour. So that is a quick demonstration of how the gradient map works differently to the gradient fill tool. Now, going back to the first image which I started, now this is going to be sort of covering what it was in the video tutorial that demonstrated to me the difference between these two tools, and I will try and copy a bit from that video tutorial. Hopefully that will be okay with the magazine. Now, the first thing I need to do is I'm going to make 3 gradient map layers, but the first one I'm going to do is let me make the layer first, gradient map. As you can see, this changes this to a black and white image as before, but this time I'm going to change the blending mode to overlay, and I'm going to lower the opacity to around about 60% before I start changing the colours. So I will click in here, and I will then change the first colour. Now, I did make a note of the HTML numbers I wanted to use for this, which was 848181. Okay, which is a grey colour, which makes the whole image a bit brighter. And then for the highlights, the HTML code was 505331, and then okay. As you can see, that is sort of grey, which made the whole image a bit brighter, to a I don't know what colour you would call that really, greeny brown colour, which just brought back some of the colours, because it did come from the yellow range. It brought back some of the yellow in the image. So if I just turn that on and off, as you can see, because it has made the darker shades a little bit brighter, I've got a bit more blue in the sky, and other areas are altered obviously, but it was the sky that I was trying to particularly alter in this case. And the highlights, I wanted to make that yellow building a bit more punchier. So that was the first gradient map. So I will add another gradient map. Now this one I'm going to change the blending mode. No, blending mode's down here, Carl. To soft light, and this time I didn't make a note of the settings I did when I first practiced this, but what I want to do is lighten the shadows because it's got a bit dark now. So as I mentioned a bit earlier, to lighten the pixels, you can just drag down the left hand side, and I hope you can see that effect happening. But to be perfectly honest, what I'm doing here is I'm really going to just alter this wall here. I'm not looking at the overall picture, but I'm just trying to demonstrate it to you that by sliding this up and down, you're altering the pixels so the shadows become brighter. But like I said, I'm mainly looking at this wall here. So I will leave that there. Move this back over. Click OK. Then go to the highlights, and now this time I do want a red colour, and I'm looking for Let's make this a bit more orangey. It's very difficult to keep an eye on where over here. I suppose I could move this closer. I was trying to keep an eye on the colours I was picking so I didn't stray off the map while keeping an eye on the area I wanted to alter. Come back up here a bit. Right, I'll try it down there. I'll move this back over. Click OK. And then click OK on that. So I can, if I turn this on and off, again, I'm looking at the wall here. With it turned off, it looks quite flat. And then there's a bit more definition here in the image of the wall. And why I'm just picking on the wall is I'm going to delete the rest of this from the effects of this level by clicking on the mask, making sure black is my foreground color, selecting the brush tool, and then when I paint on here, just increase the brush size. I can bring back some of the darkness in the sky and keep the yellow that I liked from that building. Just reduce the size down a bit so I get closer to the wall. And that should pretty much be it now. And as you can see with the layer mask, the only white area now is this corner, which is where the wall is. So if I now turn that on and off, I know it's only a very subtle difference, but it does make that wall stand out a little bit more. And let me just come off that tool. So you can see that the effects of the tool with the blending mode and just using it selectively. So there's another way of using a gradient map. So you can tinker with the blending modes and even where it affects the screen. Now the last blending mode adjustment layer using the gradient map I'm going to try. This time I'm going to put it onto a hard light, and we are going to try and brighten up the whole image a bit. Right, so I'm going to be sticking, click on that side, really just down the left hand side of the screen, just to change the brightness of the shadows and the highlights. So I could you could come anywhere down here and make it as bright or as dark as you want. If you know what you're aiming for, it probably does help a little bit, but I will leave that on 119 for all three of the red, green and blue. Pretty much if you have them all the same number, it will be a grey colour. So I'll click on the highlights, and again I will move this up. Come on, move. And I'm going to move this up to try and bring back some of the colours that I had lost earlier from when I made this level. So these all, that's not bad, it's all 136. So I've gone from a sort of slightly, I've lowered the shadows to be brighter, and I've changed the highlights to be darker. So I'll click OK on that, click OK on that. So if I turn this layer off, it is only a subtle difference. and it probably wasn't even worth doing really. But yeah, as you can see, the different gradient maps can be used to alter the colours, like I sort of did with this layer. This one layer I was mainly sort of altering the tone. I can't think of a good word for it, but it's not really tone, it's the sharpness, clarity of those bricks there by altering the colours and the within the gradient map. And the last gradient map, I was trying to make the shadows and highlights either lighter or darker depending on where I moved it, by staying to the left hand side of the gradient map. So I hope that does demonstrate to you how you can tinker with the gradient map to affect the whole image, rather than the gradient fill tool, which affects certain areas of the image depending on which gradients you select. So if I just hold down the Alt key and click on the bottom hide show button, it will turn off the three above, so you can see that's where I started and that's where I finished. Not a vast difference, it's just some subtle changes. I could have made some really outlandish changes, but I just wanted to subtly show you how you can make the whole image darker in either overall or in places. And I hope, like me, you have learnt a little bit new about the gradient map. Thank you very much, and goodbye.